The Game Boy Advance was the video game equivalent of my hairline. It shone very brightly indeed before fading away just as it was beginning to peak. Now it's a widow's peak. For such a whirlwind of a release, it can be easy to lose track of its games. Here then is every single GBA hidden gem we and you have recommended over the years, including some new ones, just to make sure you have the perfect cheat sheet the next time you want to add to your shared library. Matey. Klonoa is absolutely a mascot platformer series that's not quite just a cult favourite, but not a household name either. If Mario is, I don't know, the Beatles, Klonoa is, Thin Lizzy? Not too many people seem to know about the series' Game Boy Advance adventures though. There were actually 4 of them, including a weird volleyball thing, and this, a genuinely quite fun sequel to Empire of Dreams by the name of Dream Champ Tournament. Not to be confused with the other Klonoa 2, once you get a few levels in, it becomes clear that this is a puzzle game wearing platformer clothes. Or shoes, I guess? Anyone want some Klonoa Tims? Dream Champ Tournament has 50 levels, each broken into small obstacle-filled sections where the real challenge comes from working out how to use enemies as tools rather than just dodging them. Classic Klonoa really. Just like in the home console adventures, Klonoa can jump, run, float and grab enemies with his ring like Henry VIII with a nice hat. You see the joke works there because Henry VIII used to marry women for diplomatic reasons. Anyway, whatever. But each creature has a specific purpose. Some give you an extra boost, some smash boxes and some activate switches and so on. Now granted, the graphics and sound weren't exactly pulling up trees in 2005, but there are some fairly impressive on-rails 3D sections, and it is just generally a pretty fun, stress-free adventure to enjoy on a lazy afternoon. Hey kid, do you like Mario and Luigi Superstar Saga but wish it had more of a vegetable thing going on? Then you might love Tomato Adventure. Developed by Alpha Dream and released only in Japan on the Game Boy Advance, it sat in pretty much obscurity for years until a fan translation finally gave it a second life, and it's easy to see why people latched onto it straight away. You play as Demille, a kid in a world obsessed with toys and gadgets trying to rescue his girlfriend after she's taken by a rival gang. Battles aren't about selecting attack and watching numbers go up, as instead every move is tied to a short minigame. You've got your timing based input, buttons, sequences, little reflex tests and so on that determine how effective you are. It keeps things active, but also means you can't just switch off and grind. Those gimmicks, their word not mine, are the real reason why you'll enjoy this one. You're collecting them, upgrading them, and figuring out which ones are actually worth the effort, since each comes with its own little mechanical quirk. Some are satisfying, some are a bit fiddly, but it gives the whole thing a little bit of nice unpredictability, like throwing toast buttered on both sides on the floor and seeing which side it lands on. It's also unmistakably the precursor to Superstar Saga, especially considering it's from the same devs. You can see that DNA everywhere, including the humour, the timing-based combat, the slightly oddball world building, and much more. If you can get over the 2 search result tool barrier of Google, you too can enjoy Tomato Adventure. Coming off the back of a fairly rough first attempt with Iridian 3D, RYNNXN Multimedia clearly course-corrected in a big way with Iridian 2 on the GBA. Rather than ditching the pseudo 3D approach, this shmup tries to do it differently. You see, the levels are built around a looping trench animation that creates the illusion of flying through a continuous 3D corridor, with enemies and objects layered on top and synced to the scroll speed. It is smoke and mirrors, but it works and it looks bloody good. But what about the gameplay? Well, you've got 8 weapons on hand at all times, mapped across the shoulder buttons, which means you're constantly switching depending on the situation. You've got spread shots for crowd control, focus beams for bosses, that sort of thing. It gives the game a proper arcadey feel where survival is tied as much to quick decision making as it is raw reflexes. For a GBA game, it is absurdly slick as well. There are huge sprites, detailed backgrounds, and a soundtrack that pushes the hardware far harder than you'd expect. There's a real sense of scale to the whole thing, especially during boss fights, and I do have to wonder why more people don't highlight it when talking about GBA limit pushers. Do bear in mind though that the difficulty ramps up quickly and there's not much in the way of hand-holding, so if you're not much of a shmup guy, you might not have a nice time. Iridian 2 fixes nearly everything the first game got wrong and ends up as one of the tightest shooters on the system. Quite the stark turnaround. Developed by Taurus, who would last co-develop World War Z? Okay. The Iron Man belongs to the surprisingly short line of Iron Man video game adaptations. I really don't get how people struggle to figure the character out in video game form, honestly. To be fair, Taurus didn't exactly figure it out themselves, as the Invincible Iron Man doesn't nail the kind of freedom in flying about that being a billionaire philanthropist usually entails, but it is still a pretty fun platformer with plenty of verticality and one chunky, starky boy. Look at the girth on this lad. Based on the pretty forgotten movie from the comics of the same name, the Invincible Iron Man really is just a compact, fun little platformer. You're basically flying left to right as Iron Man, juggling repulsor blasts, missiles and movement while dealing with waves of enemies. It's fairly basic, but at least switching between different weapons and managing your positioning mid-air gives it a slightly more active feel than your average licensed efforts. However, if you'd paid whatever this retailed for back in 2002, I do think you'd be a bit annoyed. You see, it can be completed in under an hour, and it isn't all that challenging. You'd also be very daft to pay this kind of money for it these days. But if you happen to stumble across it online, what would you prefer? This, or watching that hell episode of Invincible again? I'd rather not return to it, to be honest. Just how much of a hidden gem can the movie tie-in to one of the most celebrated movies ever made really be? Well, considering that everyone mainly makes love eyes at the PS2, GameCube and Xbox version, yeah, it is a fair bit underrated. You see, it's not trying to replicate the exact feel of those home console games. Instead, Kryptonite Games goes for an isometric hack and slash that feels closer to something like Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance or Diablo. You pick from Aragorn, Legolas or Gimli and work through a series of combat-heavy stages that loosely follow the events of the film. The structure is simple, but each character has their own moveset and upgrades with special attacks that actually feel worth using rather than just being there for show. Combat has a bit of heft to it, enemies come in large enough groups to keep things busy, and there's just enough variation on objectives to stop it from completely blending together. It also supports co-op, which for a GBA game is pretty neat. Now don't get us wrong, you're not getting cinematic storytelling here, you're just getting a stripped back version of the journey with a focus on action and smashing things until they're dead. There is a surprising amount of stuff to collect here though, as you can even unlock Smeagol as an unlockable character and batter the Nazgul with him. And oh man, I am in love with the bit crushed versions of the Howard Shore soundtrack here. And also the way that Saruman absolutely stacks it. If you want GBA Diablo, you know exactly where to go with this one. Dragon Quest is possibly the only RPG series comparable to Final Fantasy that's had a ridiculous amount of both main entries and spin-offs. Maybe Shin Megami Tensei 2, but I just shifted a headache and I don't want another one. It's the DQ spin-offs we want to focus on today, specifically Dragon Quest Monsters. Inspired heavily by the monster catching gameplay of Pokemon, Dragon Quest Monsters sees players capturing monsters to fight for them instead of just picking a character class and bonking everyone on the head. At least that was the formula before the Japan exclusive Dragon Quest Monsters Caravan Heart rocked up anyway, as this third entry in the series allows the player's character to fight alongside their monsters instead of sitting back like an old-timey general refusing to get their hands dirty. Players in Caravan Heart control Kiefer, not the guy from 24, but the protagonist of Dragon Quest VII, as they're transported to the world of Dragon Quest II. Immediately, they become the leader of a caravan alongside Lewin, someone who's looking for a cure for their sick parents. As mentioned, the key addition to Caravan Heart was the fact that players could hire humans alongside monsters to defend their caravan, with 20 character classes giving you plenty of control over your party. When you consider the ability to use monster hearts to evolve your critters and to turn your caravan into a sort of travelling town complete with resources and shop fronts, there is an incredible amount of depth here in Dragon Quest Monsters Caravan Heart. Sorry if that sounded like a broken record. Sometimes a hidden gem isn't just a game that was an original release for that platform, but instead a new version of a classic that might not have got the love it should have earned when it launched. One of those on the GBA is Broken Sword: The Shadow of the Templars. Instead of just being a straight port of the original point-and-click adventure game, Broken Sword: The Shadow of the Templars was actually rebuilt from the ground up on a new engine in order to create an authentic experience on a handheld platform. But yes, it is hard to create a proper point-and-click adventure game on the GBA when there isn't even a mouse you can do that pointing and clicking with, so developers Revolution Software had to get creative. That's right, they gave you a gun. No, instead of controlling a cursor on a tiny screen, which would have caused too much visual clutter for the GBA. Broken Sword The Shadow of the Templars instead put players directly in control of protagonist George. You're not just clicking on objects to get George to walk there, but guiding him with the D-pad like a regular adventure game. Another feature that helped make Broken Sword more accessible for the GBA is that players can hold down a button to see every interactable on screen, instead of just clicking on every little detail and hoping it progresses the game. The story is mostly the same, albeit with some instances of cut dialogue, with George investigating a bomb plot in Paris that spirals out into a conspiracy involving the Templars themselves. There are no giant hay bales to leap into, or random eagles and stuff, but the GBA feels like a forgotten but brilliant way to experience a classic that's impossible to not feel impressed by. If you were a kid growing up in the early to mid 2000s, the chances are pretty huge that you would have at least watched one episode of Kim Possible, or you've grown up and are more interested in the villain Shigo. We know what you are. We are also you. The cartoon about a teenage super spy, Kim Possible felt like a genuine hit for Disney's TV division, so naturally they tried to milk the franchise for all it's worth. That, as is the Disney way, includes video games, with Kim Possible starring in plenty of video games that fleshed out the adventures of the world's greatest spies. The first game on the GBA didn't set the world alight, but Kim Possible 2 Draken's Demise basically ditched everything about that original release and was much better for it. While the first game in the series was a straightforward beat-em-up with hardly any original qualities, Kim Possible 2 takes on the form of an action platformer. Kim comes armed with plenty of gadgets to make her way through the game's massive levels with that offer multiple routes, and while you'll be using the Bionic Commando-esque grappling hook for most of it, there are plenty of other tools to play around with too. Throw in 4 distinct episodes, different sections of the game designed to be sequels to various episodes in Season 2 of the show, and Kim Possible 2 is a perfect accompaniment for fans who grew up watching arguably one of the greatest kids' cartoons. Have no shame in playing this on the bus. You're an adult, you have free will. So what if you fancy a cartoon a bit still, or a lot still? Another example of a remake or reimagining on a handheld platform, Defender of the Crown originally debuted in 1986 for the Commodore Amiga, before being ported to various other platforms over the next few years. Unfortunately, developers Cinemaware would go out of business in 1991, but in good news for those who love strategy games on handheld platforms, the company was revived in the year 2000 to create new versions of some of their classic games. Don't worry too much about where they are these days, they're fine, okay? As you've no doubt guessed, one of those games was of course Defender of the Crown, and if medieval strategy games feel like a niche that you're not getting enough of, or you're tired of playing Advance Wars over and over again, Defender of the Crown deserves your focus as well. Set during the Dark Ages, the King of England has been slain and now the various territorial leaders are fighting for the scraps and to establish their own dominion in a now leaderless land. The player takes over control of one of 4 different Saxon warriors, each with their own strengths and weaknesses, as they try to defend England from the invading Normans, only to turn their attention inward as the different Saxon leaders vie for control. Players amass armies and take control of territories via different mini-games, which include storming the castle or competing in a jousting tournament. It's a hands-on strategy game and one that's worth your time if you're still waiting for Total War 1066 or something similar. Why do developers love making games about cute animals or even just cute marbles rolling around silly mazes and completing platforming puzzles? Obviously we're not complaining, because the more Super Monkey Ball we can get in this world, the closer we remain to God, but there's definitely a pattern going on, right? Turbo Turtle Adventure follows the same formula, with a cutie patootie turtle rolling around some mazes and just living his best life. Well, we're not actually sure if the turtle on the cover is cute or has been witness to horrors beyond mortal comprehension, but it's either one or the other. As a game, it follows the same formula as Monkey Ball, but with a top-down perspective instead of 3D, which might explain why Turbo Turtle Adventure was overshadowed by games like, Super Monkey Ball Jr. As a game, Turbo Turtle Adventure couldn't be simpler, as you're guiding the turtle in question through dozens of maze-like levels in order to reach the goal before time runs out. A tale as old as time, or as old as gaming anyway. You can move, jump and collect power-ups that give you various abilities to solve the game's many puzzles, and with a bunch of hidden levels to find by discovering invisible platforms, there's plenty of solid gameplay here to sink your teeth into as well. Admittedly, Turbo Turtle Adventure can get a little bit repetitive before you reach the end, considering it's the same formula for 50 or so levels, but while it lasts, Turbo Turtle Adventure is brilliant fun. Tater's gonna tate. The GBA is definitely no stranger to housing puzzle games of various quality, with many either aping a Marble Madness or Super Monkey Ball formula, while others go for games like Tetris or Puyo Puyo, matching colours and symbols to score points. Turbo Turtle Adventure was an example of the former, and Hot Potato is definitely an example of the latter. But Hot Potato definitely has enough of its own ideas and charm to make it stand out from the crowd. You know, even if the box art tells you precisely nothing about the game. One look at the cover and you'd have no idea that the game is about lobbing alien potatoes from a moving bus in an attempt to clear a highway. Yeah, Claire Obscure is amateur hour stuff indeed. The core gameplay of Hot Potato has the player in control of a bus scrolling up the highway, being blocked by groups of alien potatoes on the road. Yeah, I'm never going to get tired of saying alien potatoes. Fortunately, the bus has 6 alien potatoes riding along too, which can be launched forward in a row of 3 in an attempt to colour match with the potatoes on the road. Doing so will wipe them off the road, while hitting 2 potatoes the same colour will create more obstacles. It's a match game and a shoot 'em up in one, which feels like the exact kind of genre mashing you should expect from the Game Boy Advance. You know, mash? Because potato. With plenty of levels and more challenges as you progress through the game, Hot Potato is definitely one to keep your eyes peeled for.
Looking good. Looking real good. One.
Look, we're not trying to load videos like these up with boxing games, but there are just so happens to be plenty of cool-ass boxing games on retro platforms. Can we even get a crumb of those on modern platforms that aren't just Punch-Out clones or bad attempts at Fight Night? We're not asking for much, obviously. Still, it's not like Boxing Fever doesn't wear its Punch-Out influence on its sleeve or, well, gloves. Ready to Rumble, bring that back, I'd love that. Ready to Rumble Boxing, what a game. It just so happens to have its own flair and style that makes it quite an impressive little GBA game. In fact, if we include the boxer's left and right arms as guns, you could even say it's the best looking first person shooter on the GBA. Unfortunately, the gun show is metaphorical instead of literal, but this is still a gorgeous looking game. A first-person boxing game, players use the D-pad to block and punch, while also using the left and right bumpers to properly dodge attacks. It's simple enough to learn, and there's only a couple of belts to fight for with a handful of fights each, so it's not like Boxing Fever is filled to the brim with content, but if you want an example of amazing graphics on the GBA, look no further. The game's graphical engine uses sprite work and shading to create a pseudo 3D look, which gives each of the game's characters more of a distinct feel. It's genuinely impressive for the handheld, feeling like a pocket comparison to the PS2's Black and Bruised in terms of art style. Boxing Fever is light arcadey fun and will definitely entertain you for a few rounds. Video game tie-ins to films and even books are nothing new or even novel. That pun wasn't intentional, but we've already spoken out loud and we don't have time to linger, but we do, however, have plenty of time for stories about time travel shenanigans and dinosaurs. A Sound of Thunder, then, is the perfect game for us to spotlight. What's interesting about this particular film tie-in, though, is that even though it's based heavily on the events of the film, it was released on the GBA in Europe about a year and a half before the film's eventual release, and about 6 months before the film in the US. It's not even like the game uses the original Ray Bradbury short story from the 50s, as so much of the plot and threats you face are linked to the film. It's wild that there was that much of a time gap, really. It's just something that you just wouldn't see today. The game version of A Sound of Thunder sees players controlling Edward Burns' character Travis Ryer, an expedition guide for Time Safari that lets the ultra-rich hunt dinosaurs. Stupid. Due to one of the rich idiots stepping off the mandated path and squishing a butterfly, time is now distorting to the point where vegetation is overwhelming future Chicago and transforming people into mutants. It's nothing like the original short story, basically, but it does create an isometric shooter that lets players shoot dinosaurs, which is typically quite good fun. Admittedly, it's not the greatest reviewed GBA game ever, but it did receive a warmer reception than the film and included 4-player death matches with just 1 cartridge and link cable. That's pretty cool, even if the film was pretty bad. What the blazes were they thinking? Despite the fact that being a firefighter is arguably the most heroic and brave of all the emergency services, it feels like games that let you play as a firefighter are as rare as they come. For every firefighting game, it feels like there's about 200 where you play as a cop. Apparently, literally fighting fire with your fists, that's how it works, isn't it? Isn't very cool, but fortunately for us, Way Forward didn't subscribe to that notion. Punch your fireplace in the fire face. In 2003, they released Rescue Heroes Billy Blazes, a side-scrolling platformer based on the Rescue Heroes line of toys from Fisher-Price, that even included TV shows and a direct-to-TV film. Do you want the best of the best though? Well, Way Forward has your back. Players control another nominative determinism victim in Billy Blazes, a firefighter who rushes to action when a lightning strike causes a forest fire that's threatening an entire city. Across 8 levels, along with bonus levels in between, you use your hose and various tools to put out raging infernos and rescue the citizens that are in peril. There are 2 difficulty modes, with Rookie allowing for infinite resources, while the advanced mode requires players to find hydrants to refill your water, along with the tools you'll need to solve all the puzzles. Again, firefighting games feel like they're an all too rare occurrence, so one that offers a rare type of gameplay that's also actually good is worth mentioning. Rescue Heroes Billy Blazes is that game. Usually we like to include one Japan-only release in these videos, but today you're getting 2. Consider yourself lucky, or cursed. Up to you, I suppose. Anyway, the Champs series of games by Compile are about as hard to nail down as a dust cloud, with the first 2 games, Bucket Relay Champ and Quiz Tsunahiki Champ, releasing on developer Compile's Disc Station magazine discs. Both were just minigames, with the second one essentially being a trivia game, while the first one is literally about passing bucket from duck to duck. Those ducks are the so-called champs, and are the only thing that would make the transition to the eventual third and final release on GBA, Guru Logichamp. A variation on the classic Japanese game of Sokoban, Guru Logichamp sees 2 heroic champs trying to fight against a demonic champ called Boss. That sounds like the premise for a shooter or beat 'em up, but Guru Logichamp is actually a puzzle game, with the player trying to add or remove blocks from a board in order to make a shape and solve the puzzle. It sounds like a simple enough premise, but the game throws so many hazards and issues your way across the over 300 levels that you'll be trying to solve this game's riddles for a long time indeed. You've even got an additional multiplayer mode where players compete to complete a puzzle as quickly as possible, because puzzles aren't stressful enough on their own. Compared to some of those bigger hitters I mentioned earlier, Seema the Enemy isn't exactly filled to the brim with RPG mechanics and the like. There's no experience points, skill trees, or leveling up to speak of, but you do get to control a huge party of characters, each with their own personality and abilities, as you try to achieve a common purpose. It just so happens to be that the common purpose in Seema the Enemy isn't to kill God or stop a civil war between 2 rival nations by killing God like other great RPGs. Instead, Seema the Enemy is about a group of humans simply trying to survive as they're dragged into a battle with a hostile enemy lifeform that feeds on hope. The game opens with a train of survivors and gate guardians, the main characters and protectors of this herd of humans, being dragged into an alien world by a force known as the Seema. Instead of just killing everyone outright, because that's just no fun, is it? The Seema force the survivors into elaborate mazes with little to no hope of escape, purely so they can feast on the human sorrow. It's pretty grim stuff, but luckily you've got a team of people with all kinds of skills, so you better put them to use. Seema the Enemy uses a blend of action RPG, strategy and puzzler to create a game unlike many others, either on the GBA or in general, but critics at the time seemed divided on whether or not it was a blend that actually came together, but go on, give it a go yourself. Buckle up, buckaroos, it's time to learn about yet another spin-off series to the Shin Megami Tensei series.
You're joking. Not another one?
Yeah, seriously, there are more branches on the Megami Tensei franchise than there is on the Samoan bloodline. One part of the overall franchise that's been forgotten though is the Devil Children series, known as Demi-Kids when it finally came to North America. Originally released on the Game Boy Color, the series follows a conveyor belt of human and demon hybrids known as the Devil Children as they travel from the demon world to Tokyo, battling and working with monsters in the process. Following from the Pokemon playbook, which pretty much took from the SMT playbook when you think about it, and not just with capturing monsters, Devil Children would drop multiple versions during one release. Think red and blue, but the difference between them was more than just colour. Take the GBA release of SMT Devil Children Light Book and Dark Book, which were released in North America as Demi-Kid's Light version and Dark version. The Light version follows Jin as he's forced to fight with rebel forces in Valhalla against a tyrannical force, while the Dark version is about Akira, someone summoned by Lucifer to a land called Dem. Both stories are completely different, but intersect at key points, meaning to get the full story you need to play both. Expensive, sure, but Google is free. As for the gameplay, the children can't fight for themselves, but send out their captured demons to fight for them. So, if you want a darker take on Pokemon, this forgotten SMT spin-off is here waiting for you. The sentence that every Minecraft player utters whenever they lose all the netherite weapons and pickaxe in lava or something, I don't know. Back to Stone is a pretty hardcore RPG for the GBA that asked a lot of patience from its player base. Despite the fact that the standard for GBA games by the time 2006 rolled around was for some kind of memory on the cartridge to allow for save slots, Back to Stone offered no save data whatsoever. Instead, Back to Stone offered a password-style system reminiscent of old NES and SNES games, which was a nightmare for anyone who does like to use a notepad while they're gaming. Hope you've got a photographic memory for all those passwords you need to remember. In Back to Stone, players control an amnesiac human who's been experimented on by demons. Said demons are now running the world and have given this human the ability to transform into one himself, so now he's going to take the fight to the demonic hordes. Admittedly more of an action RPG than a game that requires huge skill trees, Back to Stone's combat has you turning demons to stone once you've defeated them. You can then use these petrified monsters to solve puzzles, and if you're struggling in combat and take enough damage, you'll transform into a demon and deal massive damage. It is a bit of a flawed RPG, but Back to Stone has some novel ideas when it comes to GBA RPGs. It's not amazing, but it deserves a slightly better fate. A few GBA games managed to get some kind of re-release, port or conversion for Nintendo's next handheld, the Nintendo DS. Mazes of Fate was one such game, with the DS version of the game being considered a giant leap backwards from the original work, despite adding new character classes, a fully 3D graphical overhaul, and a redesign of the in-game dungeons to include actual secret areas. It sounds like it should be the definitive Mazes of Fate experience, but according to the IGN review of the game, the enemy AI was broken in such a way that you could just move and attack in such an easily abusable way where enemies could never touch you. You were basically putting a hand on a small person's head and watching them swing with futility while using your much bigger limbs to kick them in the bollocks. We have got a bit ahead of ourselves though, so let's talk about what the original Mazes of Fate is all about. An old school first person dungeon crawler very much inspired by a lot of early juggernauts of the genre, you're put in the shoes of either a warrior, a rogue or a mage and must set out to prevent the gods from destroying all of humanity and replacing them with a race of subservient goat people. RPGs are great. Players can recruit up to 6 allies and delve into various dungeons, fighting monsters and leveling up to unlock new skills throughout the 20 or so hours of playtime. Granted, there isn't much evolution throughout the runtime, so it might be a bit repetitive for some, but as far as forgotten RPGs on the GBA go, Mazes of Fate is a bit of a winner. We can talk about RPGs on the GBA without touching on the Department Heaven series in some form or another. Developed by Sting, not the musician or the wrestler, the series started out live on the GBA before transitioning over to the DS and even PSP. There were 4 games in total, with plans for a 5th that reportedly would have been an MMO RPG, but what was remarkable about Department Heaven games compared to something like Final Fantasy was how varied the games themselves were. Dating sim RPGs, tactical RPGs, and some kind of chess meets shoot-em-up silliness that's also a bit of a tactical RPG, the Department Heaven games are nothing if not varied, making them quite easy to recommend to people looking for the next favourite GBA RPG. While the series did kick off with Riviera The Promised Land, which is also pretty good and deserves its own focus, today we're giving the spotlight to Department Heaven's second release, Yggdra Union Will Never Fight Alone. A tactical RPG that blends turn-based strategy with real-time combat and action as you control how your unit fights against the other unit. Yggdra Union sees the Princess of Fantasenia, Yggdra, fleeing from her home kingdom with a powerful sword. From here, you need to form unions of units in different formations, fighting against the threat of the Bronquian Empire. It's always a bloody empire in these kinds of games, isn't it? But if you're looking for a slice of underrated tactical strategy, Yggdra Union, We Never Fight Alone should be at the top of your play legally list, matey. Are you ready for the standard Japan only release entry that we tried to sneak into every episode? Of course you are. Brownie Brown was founded by a group of former Square staffers, including Shinichi Kamioka and Koji Suda, two legends who worked on the Mana series, who wanted to create their own original games. Of course, Brownie Brown would then immediately collaborate with Square to work on more entries in the Mana series, so a change in studio name is as good as a break, I suppose. Still, Brownie Brown did manage to work on some of their own games too. Before going back to the Mana series, Magical Vacation was Brownie Brown's first ever game, releasing on the GBA in 2001 in Japan only. Set across various planes of existence, which are not my favourite planes but are generally better than Boeing's, you control someone who's attending a magical school that's taking a beach vacation, if you can believe that. The gameplay is your standard turn-based RPG, albeit with a complex elemental system and a spirit combo system that lets you really break your damage limits on spells. Then you've got the Amigo system, which uses the GBA link cable to allow players to trade spells and become infinitely stronger, like a precursor to Nintendo's own Street Pass systems during the DS era. So yeah, probably not a surprise then that Brownie Brown became a Nintendo support studio called 1UP Studios then, is it? My least favourite plane of all time, by the way, the little RC plane that you get from Zero in San Andreas. They have to fly around. Awful, awful stuff. Quick, name the tactical RPG based on a popular franchise that launched on the GBA that we're thinking of right now. If you said Final Fantasy Tactics Advance, you'd be wrong. However, if you said Onimusha Tactics, then congratulations, you've been paying attention and can read. Before Capcom started porting the old PS2 releases to the Switch, and we're still waiting for Onimusha 3 there lads by the way, Onimusha Tactics was the first and only Onimusha game to be developed specifically for Nintendo consoles. Released in 2003 across all regions, it feels like Tactics is now the de facto forgotten Onimusha game. Well, unless you've never been on the channel before. Yes, it is more forgotten than both Blade Warriors and Dawn of Dreams, but at least Dawn of Dreams has some potential likelihood of being ported. Maybe? Possibly? A spin-off of the mainline series, Onimusha Tactics tells a brand new story following a whole new protagonist, Onimaru. Former lead characters Samanosuke and Jubei are nowhere to be found, though supporting characters from Onimusha 2 Samurai's Destiny can be recruited to Onimaru's cause. We are also still taking the war to Nobunaga Oda, much like other Onimusha games, so it's got the main hallmark of an Onimusha game after all. Instead of a character action / survival horror blend, you've got a tactical RPG with multiple characters in your party, experience points to earn, and new weapons to unlock. It is pretty simple, straightforward stuff, and reviews were decent if unspectacular, but for tactics lovers, what are you saying? If you're a Dragon Ball fan who's interested in RPGs on the Game Boy Advance, there's a more than small chance that you're already well aware of the legacy of Goku. Developed by Quentin Tarantino's least favourite studio, Webfoot Technologies, Dragon Ball Z The Legacy of Goku was a trilogy of side-scrolling action RPGs that chronicled the story of Goku along with the rest of the Z fighters throughout the different arcs of DBZ. The first game, which launched in 2002, followed Goku and the gang from the start of the series with the Saiyan Saga all the way up to Goku's final battle with Frieza on planet Namek. It was a good blueprint, as even though reviews weren't great, The Legacy of Goku ended up becoming one of the highest selling games throughout the entirety of the GBA's lifespan. It's the sequel, the aptly named The Legacy of Goku 2, where Webfoot really decided to lock their hell in. Granted, Dragon Ball Z itself gave them the best material to work with for the sequel, as the second part of the trilogy focuses on the entire Cell saga. New to this version of the game is transformations, giving players the ability to fill a rage meter and unleash their Super Saiyan forms, along with a host of playable characters alongside Goku to really flesh out all aspects of the Cell saga storyline. You can even unlock Mr. Satan as the final playable character, which leads to a whole other alternate ending, so Dragon Ball Z The Legacy of Goku 2 is incredible for that alone. Mr. Satan Hive, arise. For a long time, Kien was the definition of a forgotten GBA RPG, but not because it launched and was immediately overshadowed by another much bigger release. In fact, Kien never launched at all, well, at least during the GBA's normal lifespan. Announced in 2002, Kien was due to be the first GBA game to be developed by an indie Italian company, but due to a variety of unforeseen issues and publishers backing out the project, Kien would end up in development hell for a whopping 22 years. The game had been basically finished, but developers Age of Games, formerly known as PM Studios, couldn't get a publisher to invest in a physical launch of a GBA game, especially years after people had moved on from the console. Fast forward to a post-pandemic, always-online world, and people were really getting back into retro gaming, leading publisher Incube 8 to agree to create a physical print of Kien for the GBA in 2024. Of course, if you want a digital version for emulation purposes, you can get that for much cheaper too, but either way, Kien destroyed the Duke Nukem Forever record of most delayed game to finally launch. As for the game itself, it's described by lead game designer Fabio Belsanti as a pre-Souls-like platformer, with RPG elements as players explore the game's 20 plus levels. It's a challenging game, but arguably not as challenging as the journey it took to get released, making it incredibly worthy of praise for finally making it over the finish line. Dark Jack, the enemy of Light Jack, took a break from his eternal war with his brighter doppelganger to recommend yet another treasure banger. One of my absolute favourites was Advanced Guardian Heroes. As certified treasure fiends, we're compelled to agree with Dark Jack's wishes. Guardian Heroes is a game that needs no introduction at this point, with the now legendary beat-em-up considered among the best of Treasure's trove of games. But despite that universal acclaim, little is ever said about the GBA follow-up release. Aptly titled Advanced Guardian Heroes, the game follows a new vessel for the undead hero as they face off against Zur, Cannon, and the previous game's heroes. Much like the first Guardian Heroes, AGH is a side-scrolling beat-em-up with the player earning experience by bashing their way through hordes of enemies. What separates this sequel from its predecessor is the fact that the player is no longer locked to 3 lanes of movement and can freely move towards and away from the screen. Despite the diminutive stature of the GBA though, Treasure still managed to make the combat deep and engaging, same as it ever was. Shame this version of the game never got the port/remake treatment like the original Guardian Heroes did on Xbox 360, eh? Maybe one day we'll see it on the Switch. It could be pretty killer. We're big style Killswitch fans here, both of the metalcore band Killswitch Engage and of a forgotten 6th generation game, and it's our curse to rabbit on about both. Killswitch, the PS2 shooter that helped to push Winback's cover system forward, that'd go on to inspire Gears of War, and then every other cover shooter immediately after Gears blew up, does deserve its flowers. What many people might not know, however, is that Killswitch even received a GBA port, and while many GBA ports of PS2 games at that time tended to be watered down versions of the game, often played from a completely different perspective or genre, Killswitch aimed to be a bit of a remake of the original release. Released a year after its home console counterpart, Killswitch for the GBA is basically the same game, only with vastly inferior visuals and it's quite a lot shorter. The levels are still massive, the cover shooting is still present, and you'll still get shot to ribbons if you try to run and gun this bad boy. Quite frankly, the fact that the game's developers were able to get a third-person cover shooter to work on the GBA is mind-boggling. Look at my mind how it boggles, so it being pretty decent is just the icing on the cake. Is it better than its bigger home console brother? No, it's not, and it's barely over an hour long, but if nothing else, it's a testament to the development team's talent that they attempted this project and the result is actually playable to begin with. And you know what, even though it has a couple of frustrations, it's still pretty fun. Right, time to re-summon Craig Charles. I'm joking, I wouldn't do that to you. Senny was pretty sen with his shout, best GBA game will always be Super Robot Wars J. Not to be confused with the British show hosted by Craig Charles, everyone's 8th or 9th favourite scouser mentioned in the last video. Super Robot Wars is a tactical RPG series that's been running for the past 30 plus years. Kinda like the Super Smash Bros of mecha anime, the Super Robot Wars series gathers characters and robots for a variety of mech-based anime and manga and decides to let you be a big kid smashing toys together. The series itself is huge, with plenty of games and even extended media like anime and more celebrating the juggernaut that is Super Robot Wars, but for many people, SRWJ on the GBA is a series highlight. Players are able to choose from one of 2 original protagonists, setting out to try to protect the Earth from a variety of threats in turn-based tactical RPG combat. There's a lot to sink your teeth into here, from the fact that you can select your favourite mech series, giving them a boost during your campaign, to receiving bonuses if you place troops next to each other that have an established relationship in their respective series. Neat! Despite the tiny GBA cartridge, Super Robot Wars J is one of the meatiest games you could ever play, and there's even plenty of incentive for multiple New Game Plus playthroughs if you don't feel like doing anything else for the next few hundred hours, you little rebel. I didn't mean to double up on tactical RPGs here, but Rebel Star Tactical Command certainly gets a pass when you consider that the game was developed by Julian Gollop, the man considered to be one of the leading minds behind the creation of XCOM. With a legacy like that, you'd think that Rebel Star Tactical Command wouldn't be quite so much of a hidden gem, but then again, XCOM only really broke big into the mainstream in the 2010s with XCOM Enemy Unknown. Before then, it was just a tactical RPG for the sickos, so trying to encourage anyone to play Rebel Star based on that information alone would have been like ice skating uphill. Set on a future Earth that's been overthrown by aliens. Way to step outside your comfort zone there, Julian. You control Jor-El, who has travelled to Mexico to join the rebels after his parents were kidnapped by the aliens. As you'd expect from a tactical RPG, you control a range of units, each with their own skills and proficiencies, levelling them up as you go. Sometimes it's a little bit slow, but overall it's pretty good. But why Rebel Star Tactical Command fell into obscurity is a bit of a baffler, as the visuals are good, the combat is fantastic, and the story is, well, it's alright, yeah, it's good. It's there. The only real theory I've got is the game's awful cover art. The guy on the left looks like he's just walked in on his best friend probing his wife. It might have been this next little alien dude. We always appreciate it when comments meet us on our level, so when Anglo Lee gave their recommendation for GBA Hidden Gems, we just had to listen. Alien Hominid on GBA is a banger. The boy should change his name to Accurately because he's correct. Alien Hominid is the Metal Slug inspired run-and-gun shooter from the Behemoth that launched on PS2 and GameCube back in the mid-2000s, offering a budget-priced blaster that they'd come to find aplenty on digital marketplaces a few years later. Perhaps most fondly beloved for its visuals and humour, Alien Hominid's gameplay straddles the line between entertaining and John-maddeningly difficult, throwing enemies and bullets at you like confetti as you fly across the world, murdering humans. Now, imagine all of that chaos and stick it on the Game Boy Advance. It shouldn't work, but somehow the Behemoth managed to pull it off. While the graphics and overall visuals were obviously downgraded, along with some bosses and levels that were removed, Alien Hominid on the GBA is a pretty faithful recreation of the original game. Sure, the GBA was rife with Metal Slug clones like Lilo and Stitch from the last video or Astro Boy, but they were developed with the GBA in mind, making them slightly more limited in scope. As for Alien Hominid, they somehow made the square peg go in the round hole, like my tiny arse trying to reach the car pedals. Sadly, not a game where a dude called Joe keeps trying to fight your dad's Ford Focus. Car Battler Joe is set in a world where cars are revered like ancient relics, and so society has decided the most entertaining thing to do with their relics is battle each other across multiple arenas. Playing out like a cross between Final Fantasy and Twisted Metal, and I can't believe they haven't tried something similar like this since, Car Battler Joe sees the 16-year-old Joe setting out into the world with his car to try and make a name for himself. Considering it's 2/3 of the game's title, the car battling is the main focus of the game here, with players given a massive amount of control on how they want to customize their vehicle, from weapons to propulsion to various overdrive mods that can really change how your car functions. The Mode 7 enabled graphics during the car battles are a real highlight of the game, proving very early on in the GBA's lifecycle what the incredible handheld would be capable of. Outside of combat, you'll find a world that essentially lives and breathes card battling, so this might not be the RPG for you if you're more of a penny farthing guy, but if you've been looking for a game that asks what the drivers from Destruction Derby get up to outside of the cars, by the way, that's what we call derbies here, derbies, don't get shouty please. Card Battler Joe is a very good answer indeed. Now to harass Nintendo endlessly until they add it to the GBA emulator on the Switch, or you can always seek alternative means. Matey. Right, let's switch focus to our favourite zombie-focused extended universe. Not you, my somehow eternal 30-year-olds. The enigmatic Duke Fazon, I think that's how you say it, opted for a scattershot approach to recommending games, offering DK King of Swing the GBA port of Max Payne and others in their comment. Cheers for that. We're partial to zombies and or balls though, so let's focus on the Pinball of the Dead. Say what you want about the House of the Dead as a series, and it better be nice, but it refuses to be pigeonholed. You'd think that the Typing of the Dead would be the most bizarre entry in the zombie shooting series, but then the Pinball of the Dead shambled its way onto the Game Boy Advance in 2002. To be fair, we really should be surprised that the House of the Dead got a pinball spin-off, considering years earlier, Sega also made a pinball spin-off of Sonic the Hedgehog with Sonic Spinball. It's only a matter of time before we get a pinball game, which yes, I would buy that. Thank you. The Pinball of the Dead is like many of the virtual pinball games out there, in that it's infinitely more interesting and mechanically bonkers than a real pinball table. There's 3 different tables to play on, each based on different locations from the first 2 House of the Dead games, along with boss fights and 6 of the bosses from House of the Dead 2. Yeah, it's not the best game ever, but it's still a fun curio, and I'm holding out hope that...
in time, a successor will come.
Now then, Evo, where's this next game in your schedule, you big frauds? It's fair to say that the GBA wasn't really known for its fighting games, especially those that started life in the arcades or home consoles. Games like Tekken and Mortal Kombat really struggled to make the transition to the GBA, but one developer that thrived was SNK. It probably helps that SNK had plenty of experience on working on handheld fighting games thanks to their work on the Neo Geo Pocket, along with its colour follow-up. Despite their own handheld console, that doesn't mean that SNK weren't afraid to port their games to the GBA either, with the King of Fighters EX2 Howling Blood arguably being the best fighting game on Nintendo's handheld. Based on the King of Fighters 2000, Howling Blood tells a brand new story in the world of King of Fighters, with a evildoer trying to resurrect the spirit of an extremely unchilled priest inside the body of a child. This is King of Fighters, baby! Howling Blood introduces multiple new characters along with plenty of series favourites as playable fighters, making a full roster of 21 characters. That's genuinely more than most modern fighting games these days, so you've certainly got value for money in that little cartridge. Throw in the strike system that King of Fighters used around that time, where you could summon your teammate to batter your opponent, and you've got an almost arcade-perfect take on King of Fighters in the palm of your hands. Also, the sprites are still gorgeous to look at, which isn't all that surprising given how amazing SNK sprites are in general. If you thought Triple H had the monopoly on the letter H, get a load of this next game. Chip the Park wasn't the only person to suggest Hamtaro to us in our previous vid, but he definitely made the best case for it. Fun little puzzles, good story, cute characters, highly recommend. Recently replayed it and it holds up. We don't want to be known as the Ham Heartbreakers, so let's make everyone happy and gas up Hamtaro. Based on the anime series of the same name, Hamtaro Ham Heartbreak isn't the only game in the Hamtaro series, with the first game, Toko.
Stop it. Get some help.
This on screen right now, launching on the Game Boy Color in Japan in the year 2000. Funnily enough, that was a fortune-telling game where players could enter their own information so the game could pseudo-randomly generate predictions based on their answers. But Ham Heartbreak is actually more like Ham Hams Unite, which also launched on the Game Boy Color a year later. An adventure game in nature, players explore the world of Hamtaro as the titular protagonist, attempting to stop the evil spat from, being evil. Look at his evil devil wings. He must be cold. To accomplish this, Hamtaro needs to learn various ham chats, which are combinations of words, actions, and items that can be used in conversations and other situations to get other hamsters to do what you need them to do. Like most old school adventure games, there's plenty of trial and error to overcome here, but at least Hamtaro has the distinction of being 10 billion times cuter than Broken Sword. Please don't tell Will, though, that I got to talk about Broken Sword before he did. He may actually strike me in the neck. This is ultimately a kids game, yes, but hamsters, just like Doom, are eternal, except when they fall off a small step or sunlight is just a tiny bit too bright. So did I sit down to voice this entry and then discover that WayForward are planning on releasing the game on modern consoles this year, complete with a reprinted GBA cartridge release as well? You bet your bottom that happened, but until Sigma Star Saga is properly and officially liberated, this game is still a GBA hidden gem. Far from being an adventure featuring a few dozen chads with chiseled jawlines, so basically JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, the story follows a pilot with the shockingly normal name of Ian Wrecker going undercover with an alien race that nearly wiped out all life on Earth. However, his loyalties start being tested between his new Krill allies and the humans he's left behind, with multiple endings to unlock too. As for the gameplay, Sigma Star Saga switches between two distinct modes of play, as the overworld exploration plays out like a top-down Metroidvania, with Wrecker speaking to allies and unlocking new abilities that allow him to explore new areas. However, there's also side-scrolling shoot-'em-up sections which introduce RPG mechanics, with players using their experience points to level up their gun data and unlock better weapons. This is an ambitious blend of two genres all wrapped up in a pretty engaging story, creating one of the most fun sci-fi adventures on the GBA. All in all, we're definitely glad WayForward are bringing this one back from the dead. Reckon they could do Jackie Chan Adventures next? A little bit of Jackie Chan. Despite the fact that Rare were acquired by Microsoft in 2002, that didn't stop the British outfit from releasing games on other platforms for a little while there. Granted, that's probably because Rare had been working on the remake of their ZX Spectrum game Sabre Wulf for the Game Boy Advance since 2001. When the game finally launched in 2004, critics weren't overtly mean to this platformer, but it's a far cry from the reception that previous Rare platformers like Donkey Kong Country received. Sabre Wulf even featured the same graphical style as those DK titles Rare produced for Nintendo, recreated beautifully on the Game Boy Advance. Like the original game, you play as Sabreman, who has to evade the titular Sabre Wulf in their pursuit of treasure, but it's how the game goes about this interaction between the characters that makes it such a hidden gem. Players are able to go through these platforming levels normally, reaching the goal using whatever abilities they've earned throughout the course of the game, but once they've reached the treasure, the chase is afoot. Now you have to run back through the level with no abilities, all while being pursued by a Sabre Wulf that's much faster than you. Skill, level, knowledge and determination are needed to survive, making for a tense and unique take on the platforming genre. Maybe Rare could throw this on that GBA emulator for the Switch one of these days. Right, now, serious business time. Scourge Hive, arise. Arise? The GBA already boasts one of the best Metroid games ever made in Metroid Fusion, but sometimes you just need more fighting alien parasites in some kind of space station, and that's where Scourge Hive comes in handy. Ostensibly, the game, whose O in Scourge was probably nicked by this place, follows the same Metroidvania formula you'd expect, with main character Genosa able to explore more areas as they unlock new tools and abilities, but instead of a 2D game, Scourge takes place from an isometric perspective. Does that make platforming a little bit harder? Sure, but that extra dimension really allowed the developers to get creative with the level design and monsters. Speaking of the monsters, the story of Scourge Hive sees Genosa infected with the Scourge parasite, with the game showing an infection meter throughout your adventure. Once it reaches 100%, you only have a limited time before Genosa fully succumbs to the parasite, and while you can cleanse your infection level at save points, the whole game feels like a race against time as you try to keep the infection at bay. I've always wanted a Resident Evil game to do something like this. I feel like you slowly get infected with the T-virus. It'd be really cool. I think you could do quite an interesting like roguelite kind of game with that. Anyway, I'm blathering. If that sounds cool to you, let me know and I'll tell Capcom. We're mates. Throw in a rock, paper, scissors elemental combat system that actively boosts the monsters if you use the wrong weapon, and you've got all the makings of a tense yet rewarding action-adventure game all in the palm of your hand. It's amazing what they could accomplish on a little cartridge back in the mid-2000s. Ask anyone who grew up during the early 2000s and they'll likely tell you that the Jackie Chan Adventures was the sickest show on TV. You know, until most of the kids discovered Dragon Ball Z anyway. Regardless, Jackie Chan Adventures was a fun and silly adventure series that blended martial arts and mythology, and naturally there were a couple of games about it. While most people seem to care about the PS2 release from 2004, the real highlight from the series is the GBA beat-em-up, which borrowed elements from the show to tell a unique story. You're still travelling around the world collecting stuff so you can ultimately fight Shendu, but you're not collecting talismans this time around. Instead, across 10 levels, Jackie Chan and the rest of the J team are in a race against time with the Dark Hand and their various minions as they try to obtain 8 magical scrolls. Each of these scrolls gives Jackie a new ability to use in-game, and while they're not exactly game-changing, merely offering new combos or additional attacks, they still add depth to this beat-em-up as you play. Compared to other games that give you all the tools you need at the start and tell you to get on with it, Jackie Chan Adventures Legend of the Dark Hand actually has a bit of depth. Throw in some excellent graphics that accurately depict the show itself, and this is one worth checking out, fan of the show or not. If you're not a fan of the show, we're sorry your childhood was incomplete. From one kid's game to another, Disney's Lilo and Stitch game is a wild departure from the film. The animated movie from 2002 presents a heartwarming narrative about the love and acceptance of a found family, while the GBA tie-in game released in the same year was set after the events of the movie and saw Stitch tooling up like John Wick to rescue Lilo from an alien called Dr. Pestus. Stitch has 4 arms and you better believe they're all strapped, buddy. The end result is a 2D side-scrolling shoot-'em-up that isn't breaking new ground, but it intentionally wasn't designed to. In fact, the story of Lilo and Stitch's development on the Game Boy Advance is part of what makes this game such an underappreciated banger. As the game's director and now president of the developer Digital Eclipse, Mike Micah, yes, my favourite King of Fighters character, puts it, the Digital Eclipse team had created so many licensed Disney games at this point for the Mickey Mouse multinational that they basically stopped paying attention. Digital Eclipse decided to use this newfound freedom to turn their licensed Lilo and Stitch game into an homage to SNK's classic run and gun series Metal Slug, which is why Stitch has shown up like Arn Anderson.
Well, we've seen the issue. What's he going for? He's going for his block!
Reportedly, Disney Interactive execs were concerned about the game's violent nature, but then Disney CEO Michael Eisner was supposedly enamored with the final result. Who knew that the secret to licensed tie-in games would be to just remake Metal Slug? Disney version of Mad World When, you cowards. Considering that the Nintendo DS launched in North America at the end of 2004 and practically became an overnight success in the process, any games that launched for the GBA afterwards were already overshadowed by the dual-screened handheld. That includes games like Summon Night Swordcraft Story, an excellent RPG that launched in Japan in 2003, but it took until July 2006 to launch on American soil. For reference, we had 2 Nickelback albums in that time, guys. 2! 3 years is a long time to wait for any video game to land in your country, so it's no wonder that the majority of the gaming public had moved on by the time Summer Night Swordcraft Story was released, which is a shame as it's definitely an underrated gem. For the uninitiated, Summer Night is a largely Japan-only strategy RPG series, but there were a host of spin-offs that displayed an action RPG angle instead, with Summer Night Swordcraft Story offering a compelling mix of dungeon crawling, weapon crafting and social sim, all in a cartridge that can fit inside that mini pocket on your jeans. You know the one for all your pocket sand? Why explore the town and dungeon from a top-down perspective? As soon as you're pulled into a fight, the gameplay switches to function more like a 2D beat-em-up, with the player able to wield a huge array of abilities to take down the monsters. Summer Night Swordcraft Story did achieve decent reviews and a sequel, but it arguably deserves a better legacy considering it's an underrated gem. And now for the most fun, least dangerous thing you can do with famous people on an island as a child. Perhaps this is because of the digital age where many more people are able to become famous, or it's easier to communicate with famous people through social media and the like, but it feels like there aren't any celebrities in the same way there was around 20 years ago. Sure, Mr. Beast might be world famous for making dogs millionaires or whatever the f*** he does, but he's only appearing in games like Fortnite or Stumble Guys, which is such a ridiculous ripoff of Fall Guys that we kinda respect it actually. Meanwhile, back in the mid-2000s, you had actual game developers making full-blown games about people like David Beckham. You know, to go with the films he had, the magazine and advertising deals, and the one football boot that may or may not have been launched at his head by an angry Scotsman. Not groundskeeper Willie. Admittedly, Go Beckham Adventure on Soccer Island is mostly just a competent football-based reskin of Super Mario World 2 Yoshi's Island, complete with a ball-kicking mechanic instead of an egg-throwing one. Still, Yoshi's Island is considered one of the best 2D platformers ever made, so if you're gonna steal somebody's notes, you may as well go for the top of the class, though Go Beckham has extra wrinkles like the fact you can level up Beckham's abilities the more you use them in a neat RPG-like touch. There's unfortunately no nanny hiring skills to level up, though Bex would probably always be level 1 at that. He did give her one. Anyway, the whole game sees Bex on the titular Soccer Island trying to defeat the evil Mr. Woe who's turned all the island's residents into monsters, though Beckham should be more worried about his return trip back home. It's not soccer, it's football. You know what those bloody English think about words? I'm Welsh, so I've never pronounced anything wrong. No, nothing. Nothing at all. Those jiggy little pocket monsters might be the most famous example of a game series that often likes to release 2 or 3 versions of the same game at one time, but it's far from the only culprit. Take Medabots, for instance, the series about collecting little robot parts and fighting against other collectors. Known as Meda-Rot in Japan, which just reminds me of Millennia in Elden Ring, and I don't like that. The series has seen 9 mainline entries and a whole host of spin-offs since its inception in the late 90s, but only 3 games have ever been released in the West. The most famous game of the 3, titled either Medabots Metabi or Medabots Rakusho depending on the version you buy, is actually a remake of the second game in the series, and it's a pretty underrated RPG experience. The game follows Icky, a little lad obsessed with Medabots but unfortunately doesn't own one of his own yet. After his mum sends him out to buy food, Icky blows the money on a Medabot, and combined with a medal his dad received from a mysterious stranger, he has his own Metabi or Rakusho. From here, Icky can take part in 3v3 row battles where the winners are able to take parts from the losers, like Armored Core but with slightly less PTSD. The hundreds of parts on offer and level of customization available when creating your ideal Medabot is what makes the game so engaging, while the funny story and silly jokes ensure you're not just mashing through text boxes to get to the next fight. Stop mashing fast forward, we're going to the next entry, alright? Probably the most famous game on this list, considering it's currently a part of the Nintendo Switch Online GBA emulator, door, Kodorin, which makes me feel like I am calling out to my long-lost bird brethren, is a deepishly hard puzzle game that takes a simple premise and forces you to confront levels of anger you didn't think were possible. It's also absolutely brilliant and well worth checking out on the official emulator if you're able to. Essentially, you control a slow rotating helicopter who has to navigate a series of obstacle courses that drastically escalate in difficulty, dodging walls, enemies and other hazards throughout. The fiendish part of Kodorin though is that you can't pause the spinning, making navigating tight corners a bit of a nightmare. Expect plenty of clipped wings when playing this one. You are able to control the speed, but crucially the only other settings available to you are faster and even faster, which means you need to use a dedicated mix of timing and dexterity to navigate these tricky levels. Despite the wickedly evil yet addictive premise, there have only been 3 games in the Kodorin series, with a fellow GBA release, Kodorin Paradise, and the GameCube title Kodorin Squash never seeing a release outside of Japan either. I want to stop saying Kodorin now, please. If you're looking for a great spiritual successor to Kodorin though, one more time is fine I guess, No Goblin's Roundabout offers similar gameplay and is a joyously absurd trip through a 1970s world of rotating limousine drivers and candy pellets that makes you see murderous skeletons. If that hasn't piqued your interest, nothing will. You might be dead inside. Here's something to make you feel alive though, a robot called Sir Kill-A-Lot. Americans, it's time to familiarise yourself with Craig Charles. No, sorry, you have to. We did, and now you do too. You might say that the David Beckham game was the dedicated British nostalgia entry on this list, but Beckham played in the MLS for a while there and was in Spain and stuff. He's known globally is what we're saying, while Robot Wars was specifically for the British sickos, even though it was an idea started by Mark Forbes during his stint at Lucasfilm. Arguably one of the most popular shows on TV at one point, Robot Wars was as the name implied. People built their own homemade robots to have them scrap in an arena that barely passed safety standards. It was awesome, and its success bred its own toy lines, a magazine run with comic book panels adding more depth and lore to the house robots, less successful international versions, and of course a few tie-in video games too. The aptly named Robot Wars Advanced Destruction, because it was exclusive to the Game Boy Advance, featured a number of robots that appeared in the series, but the real appeal of the game was the fact that you could create your own robots too. Granted, the options were limited, but it was still pretty awesome to see your own robot mauler face off against the likes of Chaos 2, Razor and Hypnodisc. Of course, then you'd just get folded like a pretzel by Sir Kill-A-Lot. It wasn't a deep game by any stretch of the imagination, but for a Robot Wars loving kid it was brilliant, and even if you weren't, it's still a fun bit of silly carnage. You Americans actually had a version of Robot Wars called BattleBots, which was better. Let's do a robot war to decide. Whoever wins gets custody of Craig Charles. Oh no, we give up. Lady Seer was an action platformer that launched on the GBA in September and October of 2001 and was kinda completely lost in the handheld's opening few months. The game earned decent, if not overly impressive reviews when it first launched, but for whatever reason, Lady Seer just completely floundered upon release. Compared to platformers like Super Mario World, Super Mario Advance 2, Sonic Advance and Klonoa Empire of Dreams, Lady Seer has just been completely forgotten about over the years, which is a shame because it boasts some of the most beautiful graphics on the entire handheld. Set in a medieval world where an evil warlock named Onimen has unleashed a race of creatures called the Soas on the world and declared war, you control the titular Lady Seer, who thankfully isn't that weird Soul Calibur created character woman, as she travels across 4 different realms to bring the fight to Onimen and his hordes. Throughout the game you unlock new weapons and abilities, giving you more options in battle against your enemies or while platforming, while you even shapeshift into a Sasquatch during some of the game's boss battles, which helps to keep the action fresh. Did we also mention that the game's hand-drawn graphics look absolutely lovely. If you want to add an incredibly slept-on platformer to your collection of Game Boy Advance games, Lady Sia is your best bet. It's not got Craig Charles in it though, sorry.